Welcome back to the CSP Elite Baseball Development Podcast. I'm your host, Eric Cressey, and this is episode 136. I am super excited for this episode because, honestly, this is a guy who's had a profound impact on my career, whether he recognized it or not. Just one of the super knowledgeable guys in the game, has served at really every level over a lengthy coaching career. He has experience in high school, college, private sector, pro ball, you name it. Wonderful guest presenter, both nationally and internationally. A guy who's delved in really deep on the catching side of the game, but also has a ton of managerial experience. And what I really respect about him the most is he's always getting better. We're interviewing him today, and he's 78 years old and still looking for new ways that he can help players. So I think that devotion to player development, as you'll hear in his bio in a second, is one of the reasons why he's been celebrated for such a long time, but also just an amazing model for the up-and-coming coaches that listen to this. So hopefully you all take something from it, and there's certainly something for the players and parents as well. So enjoy. This episode is brought to you by Athletic Greens, the most comprehensive NSF certified for sport daily nutritional supplement I've ever tried. With so many stressors in life, it's difficult to maintain effective nutritional habits and give our bodies the nutrients they need to thrive. As a father of 3 young kids and a co-founder of multiple businesses in multiple states, on top of still being an avid exerciser, I know that busy schedules can really take their toll on us. Whether it's poor sleep, exercise or life stressors, environmental factors, or simply not eating enough of the right foods, we can wind up deficient nutritionally. This is where Athletic Greens can really help. It's a game-changing nutritional insurance policy. They simplify the logistics of getting optimal nutrition on a daily basis by giving you just one thing with all the best things. And that's why I use it daily and recommend it to our athletes. 1 scoop of Athletic Greens contains 75 vitamins, minerals, and whole food sourced ingredients, including a multivitamin, multi-mineral, probiotic, green superfood blend, and more. They work together to fill the nutritional gaps in your diet, increase energy and focus, aid in digestion, recovery, and supporting of a healthy immune system. This all can happen without taking multiple products. While most nutritional products come to market and stay stagnant, Athletic Greens continues to obsessively improve this one holistic formula based on the latest research, producing 53 improvements over the last decade. They invest in the most absorbable and natural source of each ingredient and go above and beyond in third-party testing to ensure their customers continue to receive the highest quality and best daily nutritional habit on the planet. It's lifestyle friendly, whether you're keto, paleo, vegan, dairy-free, or gluten-free, and contains less than 1 gram of sugar without compromising on taste. They put 75 ingredients through the NSF for Sport certification to come up with a formula that's trusted by some of the world's best athletes, including our own. Right now, Athletic Greens is giving our listeners 10 free travel packets with their subscription. Simply go to athleticgreens.com/Cressey to receive my offer. These travel packs are perfect for supporting your immune system, energy, and gut health when you're traveling for games, training, or simply when you're on the go. They can be a great counterbalance to less than ideal on-the-road food options. So if you want to bridge the gap between deficient and optimal and give yourself the best chance to get nutrient diversity, then head to athleticgreens.com/Cressey and get your 10 free travel packets today. Again, that's athleticgreens.com/Cressey, Cressey. After a college baseball playing career at UCLA, today's guest embarked on his coaching career in 1966, where he began with 2 years as the freshman coach at his alma mater. After a year at Pioneer High School in Whittier, California, 3 years at Santa Monica High School, and 3 years at La Valley College, he spent the next 23 years as the head coach at Sacramento City College. There he compiled an 831 and 208 record with 18 league championships, 2 state titles, and a national championship in 1998. Sac City was voted the community college program for the decade of the 90s by Collegiate Baseball newspaper. While at Sac City, his teams produced 28 major league players and had 213 players drafted. He also served as an assistant at the University of Miami in 1984 when they finished 4th in Omaha. He then spent 5 years as an assistant at Cal Poly San Luis Obispo. He's been active in international baseball, including 3 stints with the U.S. Olympic team. He also managed Team Israel to a 3-0 record at the 2017 World Baseball Classic qualifier and a 4-2 record in the main tournament. In professional baseball, he's been the Brewers catching coordinator and managed for the Expos, Cubs, and for the Rockies in the California League. He was also catching coordinator for the Dodgers and later director of player development for them. From 2012 to 2017, he served as the catching coordinator for the Colorado Rockies. He served as the manager for the Wareham Gatemen of the Cape Cod Baseball League in both 2016 and 2019. He's a member of the California Community College Baseball Hall of Fame, the Sacramento City College Athletic Hall of Fame, the American Baseball Coaches Association Hall of Fame, and the LaSalle Club Coaches Hall of Fame. In 2018, he received Baseball America's Tony Gwynn Lifetime Achievement Award. In 2020, he was named the recipient of the American Baseball Coaches Association Wilson Lefty Gomez Award for contributions to the game locally, nationally, and internationally. He's written numerous articles, 3 books, chapters for multiple other books, and has produced various instructional videos. He's also been a guest presenter extensively both nationally and internationally. Please welcome to the show, Jerry Weinstein. Jerry, this is incredibly overdue. Thank you so much for joining.
No, I'm looking forward to it.
We've had some awesome conversations over the years, and honestly, a lot of them probably should have been recorded for the greater benefit. So I'm happy that we're finally getting to it. So your bio is probably the most impressive of anyone who's ever been on this show. And we've had Cy Young Award winners. We've had some super accomplished people. 66 years of coaching, I think, is what the number was. But let's talk about the path to coaching. You played yourself, I believe it was at UCLA. How did you initially make the transition from playing to coaching, and really what drew you to it?
Well, I think early on, I wasn't a very good athlete. Like a lot of you. I mean, this is a common story you hear, especially people who have been in coaching for a long time and got started early. But I was 15 and a half and kind of a broken home situation, needed a job and got a work permit and worked for the recreation department. Part of working was coaching a team in the park. And then I was obviously playing American Legion baseball, high school baseball, but I always coached a team every year as long as I could, unless I was out playing, like I played in Alaska and I couldn't do anything there. But I've always coached teams. And as soon as I finished at UCLA, I coached the freshman team. And early on, I knew my limitations, and I knew I was pretty good with people, and I was very analytical. And so my models were coaches rather than players. And I watched how people interacted with people and interfaced and how they coached. And I asked questions. And I early on in my career, I went and watched a lot of people coach. I paid a lot of attention to that. I was fortunate in Southern California. There were a lot of good models and a lot of scouts, and I played on scout teams, and they would talk after games, and I would always be there. And when we played USC at the time that Rod Dedeaux was there, which is probably the most accomplished college coach in the history of baseball, I watched him more than I paid attention to the game. And I was at UCLA when John Wooden was there and was lucky enough to be able to go in and watch basketball practice. And Coach Wooden was a big baseball fan. And so I was very, very fortunate to be in the right place at the right time.
I love that. When you were playing baseball, it's funny, I've had good conversation with guys like Ryan Flaherty as an example, and even connected with some Chris Pollard at Duke just recently. And both of them were saying, on the tail end of their career, they found themselves standing next to the manager a little bit more often and just watching the games, through a different lens. And certainly now they've gone on into careers in certain managerial roles. Were you a player that always found yourself being maybe more intrigued about the nuances of the game beyond just what you would get as just a player?
No doubt. I knew at 14 that I was going to be a teacher and wanted to be a coach. And I knew that in order to do that, I had to find some role models and to find and get info. I mean, the man with the most information wins. Information is king. And so I did a lot of reading and research on my own, just based on teaching and coaching methods, not only to help me become a better player, but more pointedly to be a better teacher coach.
I love that. I think this whole mindset of coaches are teachers first and foremost. It's about that side of things. And so many people get caught up in win-loss records and overlook the fact that development is or isn't happening. I love that perspective. You spent 23 years at Sac City Community College, 831 and 208 record, which I think is an 800 winning percentage, 18 league championships, 2 state titles, a national championship in 1998. That's a dynasty. So I'm curious, when you go back and actually think about it, what do you think the keys were? A, to build it, but B, also how do you sustain it for that long? Because this isn't just a 5 or 6 year run. This is 2 decades.
Yeah, that's the measure, sustainability. Winning once is hard and it's really good, but staying there is even harder. And I think that for me, it was, you hear this perfect storm analogy, but it was a perfect storm. I was from Southern California, and baseball in the community college level in Southern California was a lot different than in Northern California. And the chess and checkers analogy really applies there. And Northern California was kind of like, hey, you roll the bats and balls out in February, and then you put them away in June, and don't tear up any uniforms or break any bats. And that was not my vision. And ours was a year-round process and template. And fortunately, Sacramento was an unbelievable baseball town. Baseball was the number one sport. There was a big time Coast League town. Baseball was number one. There were winter leagues, there were summer leagues. Everything was in place to put together a good program. And there were a lot of big league players living there, a lot of minor league players, lots of scouts. Baseball was important. They just didn't have the right process, and we went about it with a real intense recruiting process and year-round baseball. And at that time, there was a January draft, and that really played in our favor. And also, as good as baseball was in that area, was not very heavily recruited. Now, I started in '74, and certainly the recruiting process has changed dramatically. There are no hidden players anymore, and we had a lot in Sacramento, and a lot of good players. We built. I took a year out, a leave of absence, went to the University of Miami, and was the assistant there for Ron Frazier. And my vision for what we could do was really enhanced by seeing what he did down there, and we built a probably what would be in today's dollars an $8 or $9 million baseball facility with lights and locker rooms and everything you need to have a good program. And there was a lot of community support there for us to do that, and we just had some seed money and got a lot of volunteers to do it. And then we had really good coaches, and we had consistency. Most of my coaches were with me almost the entire duration of the stay I had there. And so we had consistency, and they were like me. They were lifelong learners, and they wanted to get better, and they took a lot of pride in what they were doing. We had a lot of players. We had players that would come to Sac City when they were offered four-year college scholarships instead of doing that because they had a chance to go out and sign. A large percentage of our players came because they wanted to be professional players, but we had an awful lot of scholarship players that fell a little bit short at that time, but later on got to the big leagues as a result of their foundation. We played 200 plus games a year with two teams. We didn't cut anybody. We had huge squad sizes. And it just was the right program at the right time with not a lot of resistance relative to recruiting. The other coaches in the area just didn't quite get it at the time. Now it's gotten a lot better. It's really, really good. And so we were just a little bit ahead of our time. We could play the four-year schools. They could play community colleges in the fall. So we would play UCLA and SC and play Cal and Stanford and travel around the state and play. And it was it was a great job. And we had great players. We had 34 plus big league players. So the talent base was tremendous, and the internal competition was tremendous. So there wasn't you didn't have to do a lot of disciplining and stuff like that because of the internal competition, and the guys would leapfrog one another and get better just because there was so much competition there.
I love that. That was my next question is like, what's the culture that makes that happen? I mean, you hear stories about, after, these college teams win national championships, kids get comfortable. I remember the story of Tim Corbin, like giving all the guys, I think it was like the plain black and gold t-shirts for practice in the fall, and they had to earn the Vanderbilt star. Like, you just see these examples of always having to bring guys back to not get comfortable after these successes. Did that ever happen? Or was it one of those things where the talent was just so good that, effectively, it was put up or don't?
Yeah, it was competition every day. Our practices were incredibly intense, and we really put a lot of value in practice. And if you can't do it in practice, I don't care how good you are in the game, we're going to compete in practice for playing time. And it wasn't like, hey, you had an 0 for 2 and you were done. Yep. It wasn't like that. But our guys, our fall program was very, very, very intense, very complex. Every guy, no matter how good or bad he was, would get 300 at bats, and our guys all our pitchers got a chance to throw at least 70 innings. And so our philosophy also was we lose in the fall to win in the spring. So we really
Yeah.
challenged ourselves, and we like to, Ken Revisa was a big part of our program.
Yeah.
I think that's a big part of our success. Being comfortable, being uncomfortable, and you don't have to feel good to play good. And every day it was important, and so you had to be ready to practice every day. There were no vacations, no time off, and it was very competitive. We had a park with 3 fields, and you always wanted to be on field 1 instead of field 2 or field 3. And we moved people around based on how they performed over time, and so it was pretty easy to coach. It wasn't like you had to massage people. They knew that they had to be good every day to get a chance to play.
I love that. And the thing that I think probably doesn't get discussed enough about this is like these are 2-year programs, and you kept mentioning the contrast with 4-year programs is when you have guys that are only there for 2 years, does that kind of necessitate like the larger roster, almost like the junior varsity program, where it gives you that little bit of a window to continue to develop versus just having guys where it's 2 years, we got to get as much out of them as we can in this short amount of time?
Well, it was really like a 1-year program because all our better guys, and we recruited guys that, hey, if you play good and get a chance to get a scholarship and want to go, we want you to go.
Yeah.
And, we felt like, hey, every guy that either signed or got a scholarship, we get 2 more guys to replace him because that carrot was out there. And so it was kind of like a 1-year deal, even though we had a number. I had 6 big league players who redshirted a year at Sac City that went on to play in the big leagues and have significant careers. And so, not all the fruit gets ripe at the same time. But our guys had an incredible number of reps by the time they left our place based on our fall program. And then we had a summer league program where we send guys out to play in the Cape or wherever, and they'd come back. And so they had an incredible number of reps at a high level that prepared them to do what they wanted to do, whether that be play at a Division I school, 2, 3, NAIA, or sign a professional contract, which a lot of them did.
Absolutely. And you hinted at it, but along the way, 213 players drafted over 18 years, and 28 of them went to the big leagues. So I'm curious, beyond just the fact that it's a lot of impressive success stories, that success rate's high, relative to the number of guys who went versus the ones who actually made it. And that's particularly the case, obviously, from a junior college, which is probably kind of your blend between, like a more of a 4-year school where they go through junior year, or, high school drafts where we know that kids have, probably a lower success rate. What was it about your program that you felt like not only produced, professional players, but guys that eventually became big leaguers?
Massive number of reps, plus dealing with the individual differences of the players. I think that was one of the things I really, when I went to UCLA, I graduated, and you had to have a 5th year to get a teaching credential, and you take a teaching methods class. They talk about proximity, discipline, and stuff like that. But the biggest thing they talked about was dealing with individual differences. And I think we were really good at dealing with people as individual and finding what would help that individual, whether it was a cue, a drill, or whatever it happened to be. And so I think that dealing with the individuals and then also spending the amount of time. And we spent, if you were our 5th second baseman, we spend as much time, maybe more time with you as we did with our frontline guys. And I really catered to the backup players because the lead singers, they got to play and they got all the recognition, and the backup guys that supported those guys, kind of like the majority of minor league players that are supporting the prospects, they don't get enough love. And I really took care of our backup guys, and we treated everybody equally. Some of the guys said, yeah, you treat everybody equally, you treat everybody bad. I said, well, we have high expectations for you. And if our expectations exceed your expectations, we got a problem here. And I've always felt that way. And with minor league players, or they thought, oh, you're too hard on me. I mean, guys like Nolan Arenado, I was incredibly hard on Nolan, and he responded. And guys like Ryan McMahon and guys like that, and they've told me, they said, hey, you're hard, but you're hard in a good way, because your expectations help me raise my expectations.
Challenging but fair, I think, is a key. And we talk a lot about coaching. One of the things I've probably the best summation of coaching I ever say is like it's about giving people the opportunity to fail without consequences, when it doesn't matter, is to prepare them so that they don't have to do it when it really matters. Do you think that's just a huge part of, like you mentioned, like the fall, like, guys getting 300 plate appearances and just a number of different reps, is like, if you get those, nobody cares about what the record is in fall ball, as long as you're competing and you're developing. Do you think that's some of the, the underlying kind of messages that were really heavily emphasized to your players across time?
Oh, without a question, and especially a game like baseball, which all your involvement in baseball,
Yeah.
there's a lot of failure built into this. But hey, life's that way too.
Yeah.
There's a lot. I mean,
Yeah.
especially if you have kids, that and you'll know you got young ones, but you'll find out that there's a lot of failure there, and they still have to move on. You can't check out and quit. You still have to wake up and face the day and do what you need to do. And from our failures, we develop our successes. And you have to. I always used to say you have to lose to win, and you have to get worse to get better. Sometimes it's not a linear progression, in which we all know. And so failure is good. And I have, and I don't, if a guy fails, it doesn't mean he's a bad guy. It's an opportunity to regroup and reset and do what you need to do. And your definition of success and failure also is important. You have to understand it's not a game of perfection, and you have to understand that and deal with it.
I love that. So, we spoke to a little bit like the extrinsic factors that help these players be successful. Obviously the competition that you instilled, the accountability that you emphasized, and all that. You were the extrinsic piece. The program was the extrinsic piece. What about the intrinsic factors? When you look at those 28 guys, from Sac City, or, certainly the guys that you dealt with on the minor league side, during your time with the Rockies, what were the commonalities of the players that made it to the big leagues versus those that didn't? Was there something about them that you thought differentiated them?
Well, certainly there's an ability factor in there, but that's not necessarily the most important factor, because that's just how big a cup you have there. It doesn't tell you how much of the cup you're filling. And I think that the guys that have a passion for the game, that do not transfer responsibility for their development, that are good self-evaluators, that are level in terms of high lows and low highs, that they don't ride that emotional curve of performance, and they have an edge. Every big league player that we've had that I know has a little bit of what in them, and I won't say that word on there, but they've got an edge, and sometimes the kiss death is, oh, he's really a good guy. And I think that some coaches, they're looking for that, and I hate to use the term choir boy, but sometimes that's a red flag. I like guys that have a little edge, and that are going to do some edgy things sometimes that you have to deal with it. But those guys with not a huge edge, but they have a little edge, they tend to be successful. And some of it is in the form of arrogance, but they all believed in themselves, and they weren't going to listen to any of the naysayers, because there's a lot of naysayers out there, especially in professional baseball. He can't do this and he can't do that, and blah blah blah. And our deal was, hey, let's catch him doing things right. It's easy to catch him doing things wrong, but let's catch him doing things right. Because on a given day, the most important thing that you have going for you is your self-confidence. No matter how skilled you are or how unskilled you are, if you believe you can do it, you've got a fighting chance.
Yeah. What's the saying? I'd rather tame a tiger than motivate a donkey. So find the tiger.
It's easier to say whoa than giddy up.
I love that. So we spoke maybe more general on the managerial side of things, and now I think it's time to get a little more maybe granular. you're best known for your extensive work with catchers. I love it. Most of the stuff you post on your social media, which is outstanding, by the way, has to do with, catchers, you highlighting in-game examples as kind of case studies for people. And I think there's a tremendous amount of information. So I'd encourage everybody to follow your Twitter. But you've seen a big shift in how catching is viewed since your first coaching opportunity in 1966. And by the way, I think I said 66 years. That would have made a coach out of you at age 12. So it was actually 1966.
Actually, I was coaching teams at 15.
You probably were. So it's actually 63 years. So I was close by accident. But let's talk about what the non-negotiables of successful catching are, and then maybe we can talk afterwards about what has changed dramatically. But for you, what hasn't changed since 1966? What are the non-negotiables of the catchers that you want behind the plate for the big game?
Well, for me, it's a defensive first position, and that's the one thing that you have to understand, because there's so many. If you're going to really be good, especially at the big league level, at the professional level, the preparation time that you have to spend on your defense, just preparing for each individual pitcher against each individual hitter, it's insurmountable. So the time that you have to spend offensively is not as limitless as it is for, say, an infielder or an outfielder, and also physically the position is very demanding. Legs, hands, you're beat up, you're tired, you're depleted, energy depleted, and electrolyte depleted, and you name it, and also you have a target on your back. You're touching the ball probably 100 plus times a game, and when something goes wrong, the pitchers sometimes are a little sensitive, and so they know the catchers have a thick skin. So why did you call that pitch, or why didn't you block that pitch, or so. And I'm not being paranoid, but there is somewhat of a target on your back as a catcher. So that defensive piece and being a tough guy, and it's like a combination of a point guard and a quarterback and a middle linebacker. You're in charge. You're in control on a given day. Winning and losing is determined by three people: the pitcher, the catcher, and the umpire. And the catcher impacts two of those guys, and the pitcher's only out there. The starting pitcher's only out there every fifth day. You're out there every day. So the demands physically and intellectually are tremendous. And there's lots of opportunities to be successful, but there are also lots of opportunities to be unsuccessful as well. And I always told the pitchers, hey, we win today. I get half a win, you get half a loss, or half a win. And they're more than happy to share half of the loss with you, but not so much half the win. But
it's so funny as you were describing like all the different responsibilities. I was like, you know what? I just realized I don't think I've ever seen a catcher on anything except for the early bus. They're always on the first bus to the field. Doesn't matter who's catching that day, but it's just there's too much to do.
Well, aside from getting treatment and looking at videos and talking to the pitching coach and talking to the manager and doing your own maintenance program for your skill set, and then trying to get a little time in the cage, and guys throwing sides. And if you don't catch him, you certainly want to be out there and watch him to see what he's working on or what the stuff looks like, and to talk with him and to bond with him and to prove, you have to have a servant mentality. It's a pretty demanding job, and it's a pretty significant job, because if you look at the runs saved just based on receiving, the better guys, they're responsible for 3 or 4 wins a year, which is like $9 million a win. And I don't think we're getting paid $36 million a year to catch.
It's a good point. There aren't many out there, but they're so impactful. And you're right. Just the simple fact they're involved on every play is huge. Maybe building on that last one that, you talked about the non-negotiables of, servant mentality and defense first. What do you think the most valuable trait a catcher can really offer their team is? Is it anything relating to those metrics, or is it purely the leadership, the game calling, that aspect of it?
Well, it's everything. And it's about his impact on the pitcher. Just the way he puts his signals down, the way the preparation is, the way he pitch calls. Is that going to make that pitcher more committed, more confident, and more trusting in this pitch that he throws? That'll give him the best chance to execute that pitch. And pitch execution is everything. I mean, and it's more about the execution of the pitch than the stuff for me, and that's where the catcher comes in. I mean, it's a significant a marriage between those two guys. They really depend upon one another. The catcher depends upon that pitcher to trust him, and the pitcher depends upon that catcher to be prepared and to lead him in the right direction in a lot of cases. Now, if you have your Bob Gibsons or your Max Scherzers and guys like that, they're pretty self-sufficient, and the catching is somewhat secondary. Even though guys like Greg Maddux, he had the guy he wanted to catch him because he trusted that guy, and so it just shows you how important that guy becomes in the life of that starting pitcher. And again, winning and losing, that starting pitcher is key in today's game.
Yeah, I think it's different for everybody. I mean, I've heard Scherzer talking about Kurt Suzuki. He's like, I love throwing to Suzuki because it didn't matter what I threw. He was always going to block whatever was in the dirt. I always had 100% confidence in him. You can look at all the different metrics and think what you want of guys, but at the end of the day, it's the confidence the pitcher has in him that matters probably the most, right?
Well, yeah, but the metrics bear it out too, and it's easy in today's game with better analytics and better ability to quantify performance. We can see the effect, and it's micro in on a daily basis, but it's macro in the course of a season, because the amount of runs that you save really affects that guy's performance and the performance of your team.
Do you think that catchers in general, they become a little bit more homogenous if the automated strike zone comes in? Is that, they're just not as evenly differentiated because some guys are such elite framers and other are?
I think it's going to change, but I think that how you catch the ball is still going to be important. The game's going to change in terms of balls in the dirt and the base running, especially with the new rules coming in with the 2-pick max and the pitch clock is going to greatly impact the way the game is offensively is going to be orchestrated. There's going to be a lot more aggressive base running, a lot more stealing, and so maybe the receiving piece is going to change, but the blocking, throwing is not. And just to stick a DH back there that picks the ball up after it stops rolling is not going to play. And if you catch the ball poorly, pitchers aren't going to like that, and it's going to be different. And my hope is that they go to a challenge system before they go to an ABS system, and because I hate to see skill levels eroded. I'm death against the shift change. I mean, come on. Well, you can't throw the ball over the plate that's 17 inches like John Scalini says. Let's make it 24. You can't hit the ball the other way. Oh, we won't let him shift, and you can't learn to bunt the ball. That for me, I don't like that. I think we're watering it down from a skill level, and I think we're eroding some of those things, skill things that are separators in our game.
I'd say the only thing that will pay off for catchers is not going to have to be that. We probably see it every 8 to 10 games, the catcher having to sprint to cover third base because everybody's in the shift to the right side of the infield and the third baseman's still behind second base. We've seen it like once every week or so in baseball. So the shift might actually remove that awkward moment for catchers.
Yeah, and really you don't, you'll see the pitcher over there, and really the only time the catcher gets to third base is when he exchanges with that third baseman on a base hit bunt or a sacrifice where the shortstop can't get there.
Right on. So taking it down maybe to the younger levels, if there are middle school, high school, college catchers that are listening to this, what advice do you think you could impart to them in terms of how do they separate themselves from the rest of the pack at that particular position?
Well, at being an athlete, and I think all too often, we get the Sandlot model of Ham back there behind the plate, and that just isn't it doesn't work. And so athleticism is important, and you develop athleticism by developing a wide range of athletic skills, and you do that by playing lots of sports and doing lots of things and working on your athleticism. And certainly you got to want to catch. And, like we see a lot of guys in scouting, because I go out and I see the top catchers in the country and for our scouts. And then we're always looking for a conversion guy, a middle infielder, someone like that. And the first question you ask, well, do you want to catch? And if he doesn't say, yeah, I want to catch, then forget about it, because it isn't going to happen, because it's just too hard, too demanding. And the guys that don't want to catch, they're tied into the bat, and they know it's going to erode some of their offensive capabilities usually. And so being an athlete, wanting to catch, those are two big factors for me. Having a passion for the game, being a leader. And leaders are developed. You develop leadership. It's not like leaders are born. I believe leaders are developed, and I don't mean that I gotta have a guy with pom poms and is a cheerleader to be a leader. It's you lead by example. You lead by accepting responsibility, by being a detailed guy. There are no little things. Everything's important, and understanding this is a hard game, and just because you're good and he's bad doesn't make you better than him. I think having tolerance and patience for mistakes and nurturing type personality, and yet having a capability to put the pedal to the metal and slam the brakes on when you have to with certain people, and having a feel for people. And that, that's a lot of stuff, but there's a lot of elements that go into this thing.
But a lot of them are, brought underneath that servant leadership point from earlier, and something that it's almost probably hackneyed at this point because it's come up on so many podcasts with the people we've encountered. But you look at some of the best major league managers, out there. What were they? They were, retired catchers and super utility infielders. The Alex Coras, the David Rosses. Socia was a catcher. You just see it so often. Brad Osmus caught. Like it seems like it's a natural transition. A lot of the managers come from roles where there was a servant mentality involved.
And also there's a broad spectrum within those people of personality. Some are more talkative, more outgoing, and others are quiet. And I mean, the quiet guys, when they say something, everybody listens. And they're steady eddies. They're that, like I talked about, that low high and high low. They're not super emotional and ride the wave of performance.
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe building on the catching side of things, you recently sent me an email. Tanner Swanson, a few other buddies were on it, and you put a lot of thought of late. I'm sure you put into a long time, but you put your thoughts on paper just more recently on this concept of big picture ideas that really impact whether catchers throw well or poorly. I figured maybe we could talk about some of them. What are the key competencies from a catching throwing standpoint that you've always had in place? And then it seems like you've had some newer aha moments that probably borrowed from shortstops and from pitchers and things like that. As we've gotten more access to technology and video and all that, what are the newer aha moments that support the long-term competencies that have always been there?
Well, the reason I sent that out is because I'm doing a presentation at CatcherCon this year on throwing, and I want to do not the usual. trying to do a real deep dive. And what I've done is I've taken the top three. I've got good video on the top three pop time throwers, the top three velocity guys, and the top three release guys. And I've got some real good slow motion stuff. But I'm trying to, throwing for a catcher is like throwing for a shortstop. It's an open chain activity. There's a lot of variables based on where the pitch is, what kind of leg the pitcher has, slow or fast, and what kind of jump the runner has. And so that's going to dictate how you handle a particular. There's no always or nevers here. That there's there aren't real absolutes. So one thing that I do know that, or I feel like I know, is that alignment and release are more important than velocity. I need to get the ball airborne faster. I think that in order to and another thing, caught stealing is probably the worst indicator of whether the guy's a good thrower or not, because if a pitcher is 1/6 to the plate and doesn't hold guys on, or the base runner has a like you're the vault steal, like Matt Tallarico, the guy that works for you guys with the Yankees, really good, and he creates some problems. And guys have good jumps, or the pitch is in the dirt, or the pitch is high, or the hitter's in the throwing lane, or the the middle infielder is not in a good position to tag, that's all going to affect your caught stealing stats. So I don't look at that. I look at the times where everything is in your, not necessarily in your favor,
Yeah.
but not in disfavor.
Yeah.
Like you have no, I can't tell you how many reports I get. Well, they stole 3 bases, but we didn't have a chance on any one of them because they had, for whatever reason.
Yeah.
I don't even count those as stolen bases against the catcher. But what I do look for is how can I be the best version of myself? What are some of the things that I need to do? What are not necessarily absolutes, because there's so many variables. You never quite sometimes get to your absolutes, and you got to throw with a low slot, or you got to throw with a trunk tilt that's not conducive to throwing the ball with backspin and things like that. But the things that I do know is that even though having raw arm strength is important, it takes a lot more raw arm strength to create better pop times than it does release. I can do a better, if I can get faster release, it's more bang for the buck than just throwing the ball with more velocity. So catching the ball deep, not gaining ground when I'm throwing, getting my right foot behind my left foot so I'm in throwing position, getting the ball airborne. So everything that we try and do is to get the ball airborne. Now, obviously, you can't just arc the ball down there, and that won't work. So you've got to find that sweet spot between your ability to create some acceleration. And I'm looking a lot. And again, you asked me what time it is. I'm telling you how to make the watch, but I'm jumping here a little bit. But I'm looking a lot at since we have the technology, I look a lot at, and again, spin axis, because when you throw the ball with a bad spin axis, you create a kind of a parabola, and the ball's traveling a longer distance, and it's more susceptible to being slowed down and dragged down by gravity. So spin rate, spin efficiency, that kind of like the spin efficiency, like those 4-seam fastballs with high carry, that high induced vertical break that pitchers have. I'm looking at spin rate, and this is something that, since we have the technology, we haven't yet conquered the spin rate formula yet, or the how, other than using some type of stickum, which we can't do. But so trying to look at that and looking at a stretch reflex in the fingers relative to finger pressure. I've always thought we needed a force plate baseball to measure. You're smiling, but you know what I'm talking about. I'm interested in how much pressure, because the looser the grip you have on the ball, the less spin you're going to have, and the slower it's going to be. You have to have a certain amount of pressure, and what's the right amount of force, and then looking certainly at how we can handle our spin rate and spin axis, spin efficiency, and velocity, and where the tipping point is for that individual. And again, it comes down to the individual. Some guys, Martin Maldonado, if I tried to increase his transfer time or decrease his transfer time, he probably wouldn't be very good. He catches the ball and then lets it rip and throws the ball 88 miles an hour. Now, the best combination of the two is JT Realmuto at this point, with really good release times and really good acceleration. And so you just I don't have a good answer. That's why I'm seeking I'm asking questions of the experts relative to I'm a real big believer that everything starts from the ground up, and that ankle flexibility becomes important because it sets that hip hinge and puts you in your glutes, so force plates are important, and we haven't done a good job with position players relative to force plates. Seems like hitters and maybe some pitchers, but I think that's the new frontier because it's a ground-based activity, and I don't think we've paid enough attention to what's happening on the ground, at least from a quantifiable standpoint in the baseball arena. And I think those are some things. But I'm just trying to evaluate everything: the transfer out of the glove, and the effect of a flip transfer versus going in and get it, and the amount of is this gap pitch independent with the rear arm and the lead arm? Does it happen simultaneously? Does it depend on the pitch and measuring all the variables? And when you get a low outside pitch and you have to tilt to the left, and now I've got energy going away from my target, which is a necessity because of the pitch, or sometimes I have to throw the ball with a really low slot where I don't get my hand above my where the ball is above my hand, that it's kind of a flat where I throw a runner down there, and so I'm just searching, really.
Yeah, I bet you gotta, sometimes it's not about having the answers, it's about asking the right questions to
Right.
they all the pieces fit together. I do love the emphasis on just like athleticism. You mentioned earlier, it's not just this era of big blocky catchers anymore. Like you see a lot of guys under 6 feet tall who are catching in the big leagues. And there's one thing I found, there's probably both performance and health benefits to it. Just seems like in general, the industry has done a better job in my realm, in the strength conditioning field, of doing more ground to standing transitions. And ultimately, catchers are probably ones that benefit the most. We do more Turkish get-ups, arm bars, rollover get-up and goes, just things that force people to sequence. Certainly we know that everyone learned how to roll over and crawl and stand and walk and do all these things. There are probably certain patterns that are very primitive for us that are really, really important for us to ultimately master these movements where they have to go from ground to standing transitions. And I think catchers are probably the ones that benefit the most. So we've worked a lot of it into our sprint work, a lot of it into our our med ball stuff, just trying to give them various challenges that require them to go from ground to upright, more than they would just squatting or deadlifting or something like that.
Yeah, this isn't going to be a popular opinion, but I think that the one knee stance has helped catchers from the wear and tear standpoint. They're
Definitely.
not dealing with dynamic balance all the time because they've got a 3 points of contact. They're not trying. I think in that sense, that's why it was so quickly adopted into professional baseball when we don't change for anybody or anything, and all of a sudden everybody's down on a knee. And I think a lot less wear and tear. I think the impact of balls in the dirt is less. The foul tips, I think, are less. They're in a much more relaxed position, which to me is a more efficient position. Now, I'm not saying it's right for every situation, but I think that it's probably helped catchers from the physical standpoint, especially those catchers with less flexibility, like the bigger guys. Like I think Salvador Perez has really benefited by the one knee stance. He's hasn't affected his throwing, and I think it's allowed him to catch more games. I just think that we have to be open-minded to everything, and there are no always or nevers. And I think that the smart man learns more from the dumb man than the dumb man learns from the smart man. And I think that we have to find what works for each, again, individual differences, what works for that person based on what are the demands of the situation. If it's if receiving is important, be in the best position to receive it. If blocking is important, be in your best position to block. If throwing is important, be in your best position to throw. And ideally, if you have one position that can accommodate all three, that's great, but it doesn't necessarily have to be. You can have a lot of options.
And I'll speak personally. Like I've caught a fair amount over the years, more out of necessity than out of desire to do it. And I had a meniscus repair in January of 2021, and traditional stance is not my best friend. I can go one knee down and my knee feels perfectly fine. Just does not love deep knee flexion on that surgery side. So interestingly, it's allowed me to kind of get in and do a little bit more. So, and I think probably for the folks who may not understand as well, probably a good time to verify, everything we know, that guys still can block and throw just as well from the one knee down as they can from the conventional thing. So
no doubt. And it's very individualized. And I think there are the hardliners who just are not open-minded. They just can't bring themselves to accept that. And I think those are the guys that really have not been in the trenches with various different athletes and find out what works for that athlete. And they're looking for, the absolute that this is how you got to do it. And, that's just not the case. John Wooden had a great poem. He says there once was a 400 hitter named Krantz who had a most unusual stance. but with a coach's correction and Kranz's perfection, he couldn't hit the seat of his pants. And that was a wooden poem, by the way. And so, there's so much bandwidth out there for every skill that, and the bottom line is the end result.
That's it. And while we're celebrating the one knee dance, or one knee down stance, I should mention that this podcast is sponsored by Tanner Swanson. So,
well, that's
give him some love.
But you know what? To his credit, like Higashioka, he's not a one knee down guy. He's got the lowest 2-point profile in baseball. Yet Trevino, he's a Bobby Wilson Texas Ranger guy and Tanner guy, and he's a one knee down guy, and that works for him.
Yeah, and Higgy's worked it in some too, so you never know.
Yeah.
So shifting gears a little bit, maybe back to the managerial side of things. What's coolest about your resume is you're not afraid of taking on anything. Like, I think that's pretty awesome. Like, I've done a few different things. I went with Team USA, obviously the Yankees role now, and what I've done in entrepreneurship in the private sector. But you've taken on coaching challenges in college, professional, international baseball. You've written books. You've done DVDs. You've spoken in front of 5,000 people. You've spoken in front of 5 teenage athletes. And I think that always speaks to is you've made a lot of first impressions. You've turned programs around. You've brought people together quickly underneath that team umbrella. I'm curious, like what lessons have all these experiences taught you that might benefit some of the young coaches? Because we always see, like, I always joke about, like, people who come into new scenarios like Johnny Brass Balls. They want to come in and point out everything that's wrong and just not even take time to evaluate what's in place. And I've always tried to take a pensive approach when I walk into new surroundings. What lessons would you have from your own experiences for some of these young coaches who may be taking on a team or a new challenge, whether that's a 7-year-old soccer team or whether it's a major league manager? They're obviously very different, but there are probably principles that are the same across the board.
Well, number one, as many people as I've helped, I've screwed up just about as many. Not knowing what you didn't know, and I think that one of the things for me, knowing that, and as bad a player as I was, I know it's not a game of perfection, and I only know what I know, and I can't. I'm not an X-ray machine or an MRI machine. I can't tell you this is absolutely right, but I'm being transparency, I guess, is what I'm saying is really important, and understanding that I'm basically, my job is to eliminate my job. That really I'm guardrails to keep you on the track to do the right things, and ultimately. The best lessons are self-taught, and you need to learn this. But I'm going to be here to learn along with you and to help you, and we're going to figure this thing out together. But understanding, I think early on, probably, I had more ego, and I got satisfaction. I figured I knew what I was doing, and the more you know, the less you know, and the older you get, you find out how little you know. And I think that honesty and also understanding that the lead singer is always the player, and you have to put the player first. And that, hey, I'm here. I don't have all the answers, and I certainly don't have all the answers for you. You should have you're the one that needs to have the answers for yourself. This is a self-taught industry for the most part, and you need to take responsibility for that. But I'm going to be here to support you, help you, and do what I can. And so in that sense, going in there without trying not to be the smartest guy in the room, and there are no always or nevers. You got to do this or you can't do that. And hey, there's a lot of different ways to skin that cat. And so I'm here to help you find the best way to do it for yourself. I don't want codependent players who need me standing beside them to help them do what they need to do. They need to figure it out themselves.
I love that concept of humility. Like, it goes a long way, and you've been coaching since 1966.
Well, I'll tell you, when you've screwed up as much as I've screwed up, whether they say you're either humble or about to be humble. So, I've had plenty of screw ups, believe me, and I've learned over time. I think early on when I started coaching, there was a guy named Paul Deese at Chapman College, and I was in my early 20s, and I went out to see practices, and that was a time where the Division III schools played the Division I schools, and he would beat SC, and all. He was really good, says, Weinstein, he says, you think you can coach? I said, yeah, I think. He says, all right, I think I'm all right. He says, well, let me tell you something. He says, winners recruit, losers coach. So, so all of a sudden that put me in my place, but it helped me because I understand getting the right guys on the bus. The quality of inmates was really important.
And I think that, the good programs across college and professional baseball understand that, good outcomes are a function of scouting and player development working together. Like, player development doesn't work unless you scout players that you can actually develop.
It's a lot easier to develop good players than bad players.
That's the undoubtable truth. All right, so we always do a lightning round on the tail end of these podcasts, and I'm actually really excited because I'm a bookworm, and I know you're a voracious reader. So, what's one book that every player should read?
Well, I would say I have two, and they're written by Ken Revisa. Ken's books, Heads Up Baseball 1. Or Heads Up Baseball, and then Heads Up Baseball 2.0. He and Tom Hansen. Those books are, for me, the mental game. I used to always. I've had a lot of time with Ken before we lost him so tragically, but I used to tease him. I said, Ken, this game is 95% physical, 5% mental. He says, yeah. He says, Weinstein. He says, but the 5% mental controls the 95% physical, and I truly do believe that. And from a confidence and belief standpoint, and I think those two books are really, really important.
I love it. What about a book that, or more books that coaches should read?
The one that I've read it. This has been a fair amount of time since I read it, but I've reread it since. Think Again by Adam Grant.
Yeah,
where we really examine our paradigms and continue. And I'm continually doing this. Whatever I'm doing, I'm trying to poke holes, and I'm trying to prove myself wrong and examine what you're doing, because sometimes we get stuck in our paradigms and they're not good, and we can't see the forest through the trees, and we have to continually evaluate and examine what we're doing, and is there a better way to do it, or even with a particular drill or concept, always examining it to see if it's still good or if you can make it better.
Adam Grant's got great stuff. Give and Take is another excellent one that he wrote that I think has some coaching.
Yeah, I have not read that. I'll have to pick
That's
that
a great one. So if you could go back in time and give old Jerry 20 years ago some advice, what would it be?
Breathe. I was always, and not outwardly, but outwardly I was pretty good. He's pretty cool, but inside, I remember the first state championship we won at Sacramento City College. And we're at the end of the game and we're going to win this thing. And I didn't, all I was thinking about, oh man, we're going to be horseshit next year. Recruiting. And I didn't take the time to really appreciate the moment. I did that, unfortunately, with my daughter, even though now I'm making up for it. I'm trying hard to make up for it. But I think, being in the moment and enjoying the moment and not getting ahead of yourself. And I think that's important.
I love that. What about your favorite coaching memory when you look back on them?
No, I've had a lot of good ones. I hate to just limit it to one, but my 24 years at Sac City were really good because we built something that is sustained. They're still good. Yeah. Managing in the minor leagues. I love being a minor league manager. I was a manager. I had managed in Modesto for 6 years, and I was in instructional league, and Dan O'Dowd and Bill Guyvet said, hey, we want to take you and Andrea out for dinner. We want to talk to you about coaching in the big leagues next year. And so we go out to dinner, and they said, well, we get some young catching, blah, blah, blah. And I said, well, geez, I really like managing in the minor leagues. Jerry, we're talking about coaching in the big leagues. Well, I said, well, you're my boss. You just tell me what you want me to do. But that's never been on my bucket list. And I really enjoy young players, which I still do. If I had a choice, rookie league or low A or A, I really like that. The Olympics were great. Got a chance to be involved in 3 Olympics. The WC was a great experience with Team Israel. Mm-hmm. And then certainly being in the big leagues with the Rockies was really good. But I really enjoyed I choose to enjoy now everything. That wherever my feet are, I'm going to enjoy it, whatever I'm doing.
I was just going to say, it seems like you have a good way of about being where your feet are. I respect that a lot. It's probably what's spoken to your, how long you've been a very productive member of this baseball world. It's that you kind of always appreciate where you are and try to over deliver for your athletes wherever you wind up. We have a lot of kids and parents who listen to this podcast together. It's kind of like the ride home from practice or games. If you give one bit of advice to the kids, and to the parents, what would it be?
Now, I had to think about this one. I wrote some things down. I think broaden your interests. Don't put all your eggs in one basket. There's an old saying, all your eggs in one basket and you can't blow your nose. But diversify. Again, be where your feet are. I think a lot of these guys are playing on travel teams and they're just thinking about their scholarships instead of enjoying what they're doing at the time and getting the most out of it. The relationships with the coaches and the players, that's important. Accept responsibility for your actions. I think all too often, unfortunately, the national pastime today in a certain respect, and this is kind of negative, but it's transfer of blame. It's not my fault and I had a bad teacher or a bad coach or blah, blah, this, accepting responsibility for your actions. And then, again, we talked about savor the moment. I think that's really important. And then and have good bad days. Every day is not going to be great. You're going to be, and that's one thing that Revisa said. He says, do you suck so bad that you have to feel good to play good? I thought that was so great. He always talked about getting 100% of whatever he had on a particular day.
Now, before we wrap up, I want to celebrate your social media because you're prolific. It's at JWON catching on both Twitter and Instagram. Like I said, really, it's like a must follow, particularly for catchers, just because you do such a great job of breaking down, content as it becomes available in Major League Baseball's games. I think it's so important to learn from basically game scenarios. And I really respect what you do. So many people are just.
I'm kind of. I think I'm kind of obviously you can tell now I'm a real Type A personality, but I'm kind of addicted to that. And Alan Jaeger got me started in that when I wrote my book. He says, do you have a website? I said no. He says, do you post on Twitter? I said, I have no idea what the hell you're talking about. He said, oh, you're a dinosaur. And so he got me started, and then I got a lot of positive responses. And I felt like, hey, this is not only do I like doing it, but I feel like it's from an industry standpoint, I can help some people and at least point them in the right direction. So I post on catching, but I post on whatever. I try and do something every day, and that's how I start my day.
I love it. And then website is weinsteinbaseball.com. Really good stuff, both in terms of articles. It links to your social media as well. You've got books, DVDs, kind of keeps track of where you're going to be from a seminar standpoint. Jerry, you've been a wonderful friend for many, many years. I always enjoy.
And you too. I'm on top of you all the time, reading your stuff and utilizing it, and much appreciated, EC.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for joining us. Appreciate all the mentorship over the years and what you brought to the field. And this was excellent content. So we appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you. I enjoyed it greatly.